My mic was tampered with. Oh, are we going?
That's a good way to start.
My
It's a
mic
good way to start the
tampered
podcast.
with.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. What
We
happened?
came in. Mine was thrown. Mine was like thrown over here. Not thrown. Okay, but it was like hanging off the side, and yours was all like perfect, like it should be.
Huh.
I was like,
Maybe somebody's trying to tell you
who
something.
slept in my bed? Is
Yeah.
what I walked in thinking.
Right.
So yeah.
Cool. Dawn's on this morning. We haven't seen Dawn
Hi,
for
Dawn.
a while, so
Well, there's a
Dawn.
hurricane I think going on. Is that correct, Don?
there is. Hopefully not where
that you
Dawn's
can
at.
talk
Ian or Ian the Terrible, I think they're calling it. So
Ian?
Ian the Terrible sounds better than Ian the Terrible. Not that
Right.
but
Is
Ian-
Ian a
I don't
name?
know. I
Ian
just
sounds nerdy.
I've only read it. I haven't heard it spoken, but it sounds bad.
Fort
So-
Myers, Florida,
Yeah.
is where it is. I saw some videos yesterday,
Yes.
like houses floating away, and
Yeah, it looks like it's rolling like straight up
Yeah.
the coast.
saw a guy
So-
jet skiing in the ocean, like with the gnarly waves. Like a pretty brave soul
Yeah.
to do that.
I
Yeah, the
saw a guy
surfers are
trying
out.
to stand up outside a reporter, and this time there's footage of an old a storm where this guy's he's pretending like he can't stand up, and then
Oh,
it
yeah.
shows two guys walking behind him like they're
remember
just
that.
strolling in the park. And they just kind of come into the picture,
Yeah.
and they're not even phased by
right.
the wind, and he's standing there trying to brace himself. But the one I saw yesterday, this dude was like a tree hit him.
Yeah.
At one point, he was standing there, could not stand up. It was legit this
That's
time.
awesome.
Yeah, just about blew away.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
Okay, so the locks. We had a bunch of locks that we just changed locks, right? Both buildings, and they're the push buttons on the inside.
It's
And,
the door handles on the inside because the ADA they have to be ADA compliant.
yeah, well, these are
Yes.
like ADH compliant or whatever. So like you have to.
Is
they're
that a
they're
thing?
basically. I talked to Mike, and I'm like, these new things you put in, like they're not working. Like no one can get the doors to lock. And he goes, well, you're supposed to. As you push the button in, you got to turn the handle to the right. And I'm thinking like that's a riddle or a puzzle
It's
that
overly
like none of our
complicated.
people like they're gonna die if there's a fire or something
they
jumps out of the
unlock fine.
toilet at them.
They unlock fine. They don't lock. So we had people having to put their foot against them on Sunday morning
Yeah.
while they're
Yeah.
doing their business because they couldn't. They weren't locking.
Yeah.
So we're gonna have to tell Mike that
We need a diagram
those were not
on the door.
correct.
Is what we need.
Handles to get.
Well, we can. Yeah, I'll show you guys what I did afterwards. But I think I got them working here at this location. So
Oh, so you can
just push the button and then lock it. Yeah, there's
can just push the button.
No, yeah, just like you push it and it locks.
I tried pushing the button on those and I couldn't get it to.
Just
yeah,
another
to
day in the
push.
life of a pastor. We preach the Bible and we fix locks.
Okay, so
Among
you
other
can
things.
sabotage those to get them to work properly.
Yes.
Okay,
I believe so.
We're gonna have to do that. To all
when
of
we
them.
get done, we can go check.
Okay.
And if they're still working, then yes, I fixed them.
Well,
If
I
they're
wasn't
not-
gonna go into the women's room, obviously, for
Well, I
obvious
did
reasons.
it. I did
on,
it yesterday when nobody
You
was
don't
here.
do that when no one's here?
Well, no, but Sunday, every woman
Yeah.
that came out during church service of the bathroom,
Yeah.
like wanted me to go in right then and like take care of it because it was a crisis. And
I'm
it's
sure the
like,
ladies
nah, I don't-
appreciate us talking about their bathroom
Anyway,
habits on Sunday.
Our apologies. We just replaced them, and yeah, we didn't mean to create havoc, but
Joke's on us.
jokes on us.
Yeah.
Mike did it.
Yeah.
We can't
Mike
throw Mike
did
under
it.
the bus. Mike does so much good stuff.
So how's life in 2022 without a cell phone?
It's so I'm in 24 hours now without. So I woke up yesterday morning to my phone dead. Like I typically put it on the charger for the night.
So there was no notice, there was no warning.
So
it wasn't doing anything
no,
weird.
It wasn't doing anything weird. And my morning routine is that I'll wake up and then I'll
We don't want to know about
check
your
my email.
morning
Well,
routine.
I'm not going to tell you about the whole morning
Okay.
routine, but the relevant part of the morning routine that's germane to the conversation right now.
Jermaine.
Yeah, germane.
What does that
Jackson?
mean?
It's one of the Jacksons.
It's relevant. So just wanted to throw out a word. Anyway,
That's okay.
my normal morning routine is I'll wake up and then I'll check my email and scroll through and kind of figure out what I need to do for the day based on emails. And I went to do that yesterday and my phone wouldn't come on. I thought, that's kind of weird. Maybe it didn't charge. I got one of the like lay-on chargers, not the plug-in kind. So maybe it was laying on it funny. And so I plugged it in while I was doing the rest of my morning routine and came back and it was just dead as a doornail.
Tito.
Yeah, Tito
'Kay.
Jackson.
Okay.
So anyway, there's a whole saga, and I went to the iPhone guy, and the iPhone guy's like, your phone's under warranty, so take it to Best Buy because they're authorized. And I went to Best Buy, and like, well, you need an appointment, so you got to call Apple support. So I called Apple support to get an appointment for later in the afternoon, and Best Buy's like, yeah, you got to send it into Apple. So call them, and I called Apple, and I said, we can make you an appointment tomorrow at Best Buy. And like, I just came from Best Buy. Like, it was kind of weird. So anyway, I'm going back to the iPhone guy today and just paying for a repair.
So we have an iPhone guy local. But
Yeah,
we
it's a
don't have an
business.
Apple.
We don't have
store.
Best Buy is the authorized Apple repair
But
agent.
they can't. But
locally.
they can't do it. You said.
Well, they think they can't do it, but Apple thinks they can.
Oh.
And I'm not going to wait for them to figure it out.
Yeah, not good.
And so Apple was like, well, you could drive to an Apple store in Portland,
Hmm.
which, spend $200 in gas to get my free repair. Or I just go downtown Bend and have the iPhone guy. So a little plug for the iPhone guy.
Yep.
That guy will fix it while you wait,
Okay.
assuming it can be fixed, that is. So anyway,
Wow.
I'm going nuts.
Oh, I'll bet.
Without a
Dude.
phone.
That sounds terrible. Yeah.
It
I
is.
mean, not only that, but like considering like the line of work you're in, like that's kind of everything.
Oh yeah, it's what. Yeah, I use my phone for work, and so now I'm like, at least I've got my iPad, so I can get my emails and I can get iMessages. But
Sure.
I don't know who's texting me from Android phones, and I don't know who's calling me and not leaving a voicemail. So that's my last 24 hours.
Well, that just stinks.
I know.
All right, cool.
And
What else, Brent? What else were you gonna say, Chan?
I was just gonna say, sometimes in the podcast, like there's a need to Google things. I can't even do that.
Wow. You have a computer right in front of you.
I know, but it's
So-
running the podcast. I don't want to mess anything up.
Okay. Like Jermaine.
Right.
I Googled that while you guys were talking just now. That reminds me of one of my favorite, the morning routine. Sorry, this is a little crass, but it's kind of funny. I remember JP one time, he really wanted to sit at the feet of Milt, who was just a neat old guy that was a godly man. And so one day he asked Milt, he wanted to join him for his morning devotions to kind of learn what Milt did.
Yeah.
But he said, would it be okay if I joined you for your morning constitution? Thinking that meant the same thing.
Not the same thing.
And Milt was a little concerned about that.
We all were.
Classic JP
Yeah,
right
that was
there.
classic
So.
Wow.
JP.
Yeah, good stuff.
We did get some good quotes from JP.
Yeah.
In the time that he was here. So,
Yeah.
for sure. Cool.
I don't know where to go from here, guys.
Yeah,
I'm
I
trying
don't
to think of how to segue into our subject, and
Just go.
we're not talking about constitutions, so
Yeah, no.
or devotions
Or phones or
or iPhones.
What are we talking about,
yeah,
David?
kind of first world problems.
I will
here.
pray, and then we will jump into what we're talking about. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for my friends. Thank you for laughter, lightheartedness, and then also just things that matter, like what we're going to talk about. We do pray for the people in Florida right now, that hurricane going through, that you would just sustain them in you, draw people to yourself, even through something like this that seems natural. We know that you're behind it all. So, yeah, thank you for this day, this time. In Jesus' name, amen.
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 You're tapping again.
Oh, did you notice? Have you watched any of them back? It's way better, dude.
Oh, good.
It's not.
We're talking about the new mics that we have.
You can hardly hear that.
I think
Brent.
we're 3 or 4
Okay,
episodes
good.
in, at least 3, maybe 4 episodes into the new mics.
Yeah, we're 3 or 4 in. And I still sound, I actually finally sound quieter than you guys on these mics.
It's about
The other ones I was just loud.
It's about time.
Guys,
You
if
know,
we would've
these,
known that
you're
years
the
ago.
loudest, and then you, like both of you are pretty clear and like consistent, and then I'm just kind of like not.
Is it because I'm using my radio voice?
Yeah, it could be because you know how to project
Yeah.
when you have a microphone in front of you.
I guess.
And in fairness, like I think Brent and I are a little closer to the microphones. You're a little ways back.
Yeah,
but
okay.
probably with
That could be it.
these mics, it matters.
So we have
anyway.
We have several ministries, outreaches, traditions, even maybe from the last time that we have formed that are actually coming up. One of them's we do a trunk or treat here in 3R. We'll talk about that later, and then we do a warming center. We actually had our first meeting for warming center staff and volunteers the other night to start to talk about.
Yep.
We're coming into the season. December 1st is when we plan on starting that. But it got me to kind of thinking after that meeting that we probably ought to just have that kind of a conversation that we had last Sunday night here, because I think there's a lot of people that attend the door, call the door their home, that really have no idea what we're doing or why we're doing it, or maybe even have some questions or some issues with what we're doing, just some uncertainty maybe.
Right.
So I thought let's just talk about it, But to make it
Good call.
worthwhile for more people that don't just go to the door, maybe other pastors or people out there that go to other churches, bigger questions that are helpful for people, like why do churches choose the outreaches they do? You know what I mean? Or don't. And so I thought that would be the pertinent conversation. So my first question to you boys is cultural engagement important for the church? And if so, why? And I know that sounds like a stupid question, like, well, of course it's important to the church. But the truth is that this is actually a conversation to be had. In fact, Jared Wilson was just talking about this week on his podcast for the church with another dude, because it should be an answer that's universal and it's not. So is cultural engagement important for the church? And if so, why?
I think there's a lot of churches out there, like a lot of people would answer yes to that question, but in reality, they would, in practice, it would be more of a cultural retreat. I think we see that a lot.
Agreed.
Christians and churches kind of living in a bubble, not wanting to be stained, by what's outside the bubble or outside the walls of the church. And so, in one hand, they might say, yes, it's important, but in practice, it might not be the case.
Yeah, I agree. I think of the phrase, the verse, in the world, not of the world. And I like how you said cultural retreat, is I think a lot of people kind of ignore the in the world
Right.
part and just focus on the not being of the world part,
Yep.
which means retreat.
Right.
So
I mean, I think just kind of defining a little bit of what it means. The idea that kind of the way we interact and the way we influence the culture around us, hopefully for the glory of God and for the good of man. But this is a really important thing for the church to be involved in.
Yeah.
If we're not, we're probably not effectively fulfilling the Great Commission. So
Yeah.
that it's something that I think churches, like you said, this kind of us for no more, stay inside of our walls thing is. How do you accomplish what Jesus left us on the earth to accomplish if you're not engaging the culture?
exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so
Exactly.
cultural withdrawal or detachment is a sin. And then the other thing, I think the other extreme that you would see Christians doing is cultural participation, or just diving
Kind
in,
of giving
in.
into
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So acceptance, or and neither of those things is good.
There's kind of like a capitulation to the culture
Yeah.
of, just kind of giving into the cultural norms that maybe are not, faithful to Scripture.
Well,
Right.
it's kind
We
of
see
like
that.
who's influencing who, right?
Yeah.
Like it's kind of really what the difference is. Like we are here on earth to have an impact or an effect on the culture around us, which we can only do if we're engaged in the culture around us.
Right.
But the other side of it is it having an effect on the church. and
Yeah, I would say
changing it.
if we're going to be salt and light,
Yeah.
then you can't blend into the point where nobody even notices you,
Right.
and you can't hide away, hide it under a bushel basket,
No.
because nobody will see it. And so those are the, in order to be salt and light, there has to be,
Satan eat it out.
yeah,
I wonder what that sounds like, of all of us blowing into
I'm
the
watching
mics. Like,
mine
are we
go
just
red.
like blasting people's ears in the podcast?
I just clipped it, dude. It went from green to red. Eat it out.
And I'm sure you're going to, go there, but like there's also like effective and ineffective ways to engage the culture, because I think we see churches often, or Christians, engage culture in ways that like we might think is weird or
Yeah.
not helpful. I'm sure we'll talk about that, but
Yeah, actually, yeah, we'll get to it. I was going to say we can do it now, but we'll definitely get to that. So how should the church choose, and this kind of goes to what we're alluding to, what it culturally engages in? How should we choose, like, okay, this is fair game? How do you determine what our outreach will be? Like, what's fair game for the church in culture? It's kind of a confusing question, but
No,
I know what I'm
good-
saying. I don't
it's a
care
good
if you guys do
question.
or not.
I think one question to ask is, does it matter? Is it helping? Is it meeting a need? Is it actually, is it something that it is going to benefit?
Because we
somebody?
actually have more freedom than we think we do sometimes, right? When it comes to what we choose to engage in.
Yeah.
No, I mean, not in a bad, sinful way, of course, but
there are a lot of things you could get involved in that probably nobody would even notice or care. So does it have a point? Does it have a relevance? Is it going to help somebody out there? So
Yeah,
when I kind of mentioned God's glory and man's good, it should fit into one of those camps, I would say.
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, like, I'm just thinking of some of the outreaches that we have, that there were just opportunities that presented themselves, that we kind of capitalized on opportunities,
Right.
where all of a sudden here's this opportunity to engage in this way, in a way that's meaningful, that matters, that seems to be something the church ought to be doing, and it just kind of fell in our lap. And I'm not trying to be vague, just don't want to. I'm sure you're going to get more into this, but
No, I mean, go for it. Say whatever you want to say.
well, I
We'll
like to
figure
think,
it out.
like, as we started our warming center, I think we're 6 years in, to doing that, and it wasn't something we were looking to do when we didn't look at the community and say, oh, we need this thing. There was kind of a group of people in the community connected to various churches, but not necessarily led by the church. Just a group of people. They're like, what are the churches doing for the homeless? And so this opportunity kind of came up, and we were just in a position to say, you know what, we can probably help lean into this issue. And it blew up far bigger than we were thinking that it ever would, even in offering to help, with the issue. But it was just an opportunity that came up that just seemed like a God-honoring thing to do at the time.
For sure. So you've been doing it how long? The warming center.
I think it's been 6 years. So it was the winter of 16, 17. The snowpocalypse winter, that we had. That was when we started.
How did it present itself? Tell us. How'd you find yourself in this?
Yeah, tried to keep the story short, but there was a group of people that one day decided to go out after church, just various people from different churches decided they wanted to go out to a couple of known homeless camps and take supplies, dog food and canned food and hand warmers and coats and things like that. And so they trekked, back into the snow, hiked into these places where there was homeless camps.
Camp COVID.
Yeah. And they, I don't think it was called that at the time because this was before COVID.
That's a sign on one of the homeless camps down there. Yeah.
But they all came back from this experience and they got on Facebook on one of the community pages and started talking about their experience of, here's what we saw out there. And then just hundreds of comments on this thread about the experience. And I wasn't part of that group that went out there. I just happened to jump on Facebook to see this conversation unfold. Mm-hmm. And somebody made a comment about, well, what are the churches doing for the homeless people? And this was in January.
There's the magic question right there.
Middle of winter. We should be talking about this in July, not January.
Right.
And so it came up and there was, kind of the comments you would expect, kind of positive and negative comments about just churches in general. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I kind of felt compelled to jump into the conversation and say, look, we've got a building that's pretty centrally located in Little Pine and, older congregation. So I don't know how much kind of manpower we would have, but, gosh, we could open up our building to let people come in and sleep if there's a real need for it. And it just blew up from there.
So it was really the result of a natural circumstance occurring that turned into something that you guys didn't foresee or foreplan or which I think is kind of what we're talking about when it comes to what we choose to engage in. Is a lot of times I think churches will look at what other churches have done and go okay, these are the things that churches do. This is what it looks like. You know what I mean? And not even pay attention to the stuff that's right in front of us sometimes. Yeah. And I think this is where we miss the boat half the time on effective outreach, is that we're not even paying attention to what's on our doorstep.
Right.
Well, I was thinking of the other thing I've seen, and I'm going to be stepping on toes perhaps, but that's all right.
Never done that before.
So we do the trunk or treat event, but a lot of churches for years have done things like harvest parties, which again, the idea is to engage the culture with something, but who's going to come to a harvest party that's not a Christian? It's a very odd, to avoid the appearance of evil or whatever, you don't want to do anything like Halloween, so you do something.
I'm a Christian that would not go to a harvest party.
Well, we know of a church that they put on a better event than we do, one could argue, but because it was geared towards Christians and not to non-Christians, it wasn't attended. And so at some point,
it was attended by people in their church.
Yeah, correct. But but again, you're not being even slightly relevant to the culture or meeting a need in the culture, so they're not going to engage.
Right.
And so and some would probably argue that we compromise by doing what we do, but it's got to matter at some point or it's not.
Let's talk about that one for a second.
Okay.
I know we're going to go kind of right field and we'll bring this all back around, but this is, part of what we're discussing right now is cultural engagement and what should be off limits and what's on limits for the church. So let's talk about Halloween. That's been a big one for a long time.
Yeah.
It's part of our American culture. We know that it goes back beyond America, but it's part of, our culture. So I just grew up, suburban Los Angeles with just, miles and miles and miles of subdivisions, sidewalks, street lamps. It was like the perfect place to go door to door and get as much candy as you possibly could without thinking Satan was involved in any way. But I know that when it comes to Christians talking about participating on that night, that this gets pretty crazy.
Sure.
So where do you fall on that? How should Christians be looking at a day like Halloween and even participating in or trying to be somewhat effective as a church during Halloween?
My mind immediately goes to Romans 14, where, talks about, one person esteems a day as holy, another person esteems a day as just another day. And kind of the conclusion is to each their own, whatever you do with a day, do it in honor to God. I don't think that, we have to hunker down in our houses on a day like Halloween because the day is evil. Have people celebrated evil on that day and done evil things? Sure. Are we celebrating evil and doing evil things? No.
There you go.
Not at all.
Yeah, I think that's the key. You could do this with every holiday, by the way. You could,
right.
And people do. They'll do it with Christmas. They'll do it with Easter. They'll say these are pagan holidays. We have no business as Christians taking part in these things. Well, are you taking part in the pagan activities? I mean, is that if that's what you're doing, then yeah, you should fully stop doing that. But I don't think that's what we're doing on Halloween.
Right.
And if I can't think of a time
Or
ever,
you know that's not what you're doing on Halloween.
I mean, even
what
growing
Romans
up,
14
even as a
is.
non-Christian,
Yeah.
there was never a point where I just thought, this is like I'm engaged in satanic evil
Exactly.
activity.
Right.
We were going and getting candy from people. We were
Exactly.
dressing up. We were having fun. And I think sometimes as Christians, we're just looking to kill anything that's good. Again, if you're participating in something that's clearly evil,
Right.
Yeah. Stop it.
Stop it. Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
It's even Christians still putting the blame on the behavior rather than the heart. Like if your heart, you know what I mean? Our heart towards something is everything. I mean, if we read our Bibles, that's just what it is. And I was the same way, growing up. I mean, that was the best time of year. I still love Halloween, honestly. But I never went door to door, doing like demonic incantations at each door. I went door to door to get the candy that each door was handing out.
Right.
You know what I mean? It had nothing to do with Satan. And a lot of times we can sit back and be like, this is Satan's night. You know what I mean? And it's like, no, this actually, I'm pretty sure God owns it all. You know what I mean? And this one's his too. So I do believe that it's an individual thing like you talked about with Romans 14, but the church should take a look at maybe the opportunities that it has
Sure.
because it doesn't belong to Satan.
Well, and
Ultimately.
again, we've had some people in the past that have just it's been a hard boycott situation. They're not coming, they're not participating, and that's okay. You have to, each person has to be convinced in their mind, their conscience don't violate what you believe. But we've also seen the good that it's done in our community. And even I mentioned this on Sunday, but at the last barbecue, there was a family that told us that this is how they came to the church, is through the trunk or treat event, which is our goal. We're trying to do something very generous, no strings attached kind of an event. It's not like one of those things where you come and we're going to ambush them in some weird way. We're just hoping to develop relationships, get people used to this, us as a church and our building and all that, so that at some point they may come in and hear the gospel that will affect their lives for eternity.
So
And
let
that's
me
the
ask.
point.
So let me ask you why. So like this is something that's like a 6-year, 7-year tradition now at the door. It's one of those outreaches that we put our time and money and people into. Why did we choose this one? Like why is this something we do in 3R in this area?
I mean, there was a need for it, and there's a because this is one of those spread out communities where to be able to
There are no
capitalize.
sidewalks and street lights,
Right.
and
And it's a very simple thing for us to put on.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of bang for your buck, is I guess what I would think. You just when you have 500 people coming through your parking lot, that's a pretty big deal. It's hard to do to get a church to get that many people coming through and just thinking, wow, these guys are generous, these guys are loving, they're kind. It does something different than what churches often put out there, I guess. And,
So in this case, this wasn't necessarily like an opportunity that presented itself, but something where you guys looked and saw a need.
It was
says
simply
that, like here's a gap, a need that we can meet, and here's how we can do it.
There you go.
Yeah.
It was simply an observation, which I guess is my point. That's really the thing that I want to drive at today with just these two ministries as an example in each location, which, by the way, we don't do the trunk or treat in Lapine because it doesn't make any sense. There's actually another trunk or treat gig right around the corner down there that's done very well. So it's not a gap. So it's not like it's a cookie cutter thing where you find the formula of a successful ministry. And I think this is the challenge with the church. A lot of times we look at things like that. We see what another church did at some place at some time and went, that was rad, that was successful. I'm going to duplicate that here. And that's not necessarily how effective or quote unquote successful outreach happens. And I think that's the point, is need is the difference. And every church can do this no matter where it's located, on the globe, is just simply look around the community you're in, the neighborhood you're in, and go, where's the gap? Where's the opening? Where's the hole? And is this something that makes sense for the church to provide or fill?
Well, I would say that we staggered our event with the one that goes on in the village, because there is another event right there, but we staggered the time to where basically they come right over from that event
they're
to
not
ours.
competing events.
Yeah, and what we noticed that in the years, I think last year and the year before, well, we didn't do it the year before, I guess, but when
COVID.
they weren't doing their event, a lot of people just went into Bend because there wasn't, with 2 events going on, it keeps a lot of people in this community, and it actually works better. So we're not competing with them, I guess.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. And then, so we don't have a trunk or treat down in our Lapine location. We also don't have a warming center up here in our 3R location. Those are 2 completely different ministries or outreaches that we don't carry across the board. And again, if one of you want to reiterate real quick, why? Why is it like that?
the needs are different in the different places. We don't necessarily see a need in the Three Rivers community for a warming shelter. I'm sure if we thought that there was a need, I'm sure we would do what we could to meet that need.
Now, we actually started down that road a little bit at one point when they did the count thing that they did. We opened
Yeah.
the building up to try to find out how many, and we had nobody come, not one person. There just isn't the same need here that there is in La Pine. So if that showed up, we would certainly consider that. But
But we do a food distribution at both locations because
We do.
There's a need in,
Yep.
in both both communities to have food distribution.
For sure.
So,
which is another excellent opportunity for cultural engagement with the free food market, because you're doing something very practical, very loving for people, and they walk away, they drive out of this parking lot, hopefully
Yeah.
thinking, hey, Christians are awesome, or
Right.
the Lord, something, different than maybe what often it gets projected
Sure.
from
For
the
sure.
church. So
well, I even think about the recovery meetings that we have. We have pretty much nightly some sort of recovery meeting at the La Pine location. They're not our meetings. We just give space to those groups to have those meetings. But then we have a recovery meeting weekly here at the Three Rivers location
Yeah.
that is our meeting that we oversee and run, and they're very different. And again, it just goes back to the needs in the community and how we can do our part to meet the needs.
It's amazing how many options you find to be evangelistic.
Right.
And to just be outward when you just look at the natural needs rather than what this church is doing or that
Sure.
church is doing. It's pretty amazing just to be a missiologist, which is just to study the area you're in and your church is in. It's amazing what you come up with. I know that Peyton used to set people down when he would go to church plant. He'd take his core team and they would get basically the daily newspaper from that day. Whatever the publication was, and he would put one down in front of each of those people and then give them a Sharpie and tell them to go through and circle the things that they had a passion for and then the things that they saw as something that was lacking in the community. And the people would go through and they would just immediately, easily identify a ton of things that the church was able to do if they had the resources and willingness to do it, So it's not hard. It's not rocket science for us to be effective in our communities. And I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Like if the scenario ever came up where something ever happened to your church and it no longer existed, like would the community care? Like would it know? And the church isn't here, to just be liked by the community, but it ought to be making an impact on the community
Absolutely.
that it's in. If it's a Christ-driven church, anyway.
I think that's one of the cool things about living in such a small community in both locations.
Yeah.
If you were
It's
just
the bad thing and the good thing.
it is, but if you were to poll people, I think most people would recognize a generous,
Yes.
outward church
Yes.
in both locations, and even the way that we allow people to use our building.
Yes.
There's more stuff going on in our building here that is non-church related.
Buildings
than
used more by the community during the week than it is the
Yeah.
church members.
and that just
Yeah.
says something to people.
Yes.
It blows people away that we're willing to do that at no cost. And again, if it's a nonprofit or a community outreach kind of thing, we generally just let people use the building.
So let me ask you this. I'm glad you brought this up. Why do more churches not do that with their building? Why do they not use it as a tool for the community or for people even outside the church?
Because
Because it seems
just
like
the
such a
idea
great
of
idea.
cultural retreat that we've already talked
Okay.
about. I think for a lot of people, their perception of the church is that it's centered around a building.
Yeah.
And churches often, put a lot of
That's our identity.
their time and their resources into a building,
Yeah.
which I'm, not knocking that and saying it.
Sure.
But then they become protective of it.
Yeah, sure.
Because glitter ends up in the stinking sanctuary.
Because glitter
That's
ends
why.
up in the chairs and in
Yeah.
Brent's hair and
Yes.
Brent's clothes.
That's why they don't do it.
So we shut everything down because
That's a
of
good
glitter.
reason, actually. Unless you're Bethel, I mean, then it's then
Yeah.
when they,
That's fair game
glitter.
there.
You can't have enough glitter.
Yeah.
Their cleaning people have just got to hate their jobs.
But we are not Bethel.
Yeah,
and
we're
we
not
don't like glitter,
again,
whether it's
again
from the
with
Holy
glitter?
Spirit or from a
Yeah.
play.
No,
Yeah.
there is the inconvenience that takes place. I mean, there's
Yeah.
when people are just in
It's
and out of your
messy.
building. It's
Literally and
inconvenient.
figuratively.
Things get messed up. There's little things that I have to calm myself down about, but you'll come in and something's not the way it's supposed to be, or something
Yeah.
got left, and then you stop and remember, why are we doing this? What's the,
Yeah.
what's the point? What's the eternal impact of this thing? And then you recalibrate. But it's a pain sometimes.
The worst one's when
Yeah.
the chairs aren't symmetrical.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
I lay awake at night with an unsymmetrical sanctuary.
So it's easier. It's just easier. It's less of a headache. It's less work for us to not let people use the building.
Absolutely.
Sure.
But not at all more effective or opportunistic. There we go.
yeah.
Yeah.
Almost
We've
a hard
had
time saying
with our warming shelter, we've had people vomit in the building and worse. I mean, just like those things happen, and they're a huge inconvenience. But looking at the bigger picture, it's like who does Jesus love? Jesus loves the messy, inconvenient people.
So, yeah,
And they need Christ as much as the people who are cleaned up and look good and don't vomit on
that's
your
right.
floor.
So let's move to this one. We talked a little bit about maybe some of the controversy for Halloween's like gone on for centuries in the church. Some people are just going to hate it no matter what. A lot of Christians aren't going to see eye to eye. What might be the controversy with the other outreach in Lapine, with the warming center? What might be some of the challenge or maybe some of the kickback from the church or people within the church toward a ministry like that?
The kind of people that it brings in.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
a rough
that's
crowd.
the kickback. It's hard.
it's a rough crowd.
There's also the question of, are we enabling
Yep.
bad
Yep.
behavior?
So there's the social, political.
Yeah, and there are
aspect
times
to
when
it.
the truth is, you can't get away from the fact that you are.
Yes.
Now again, with the warming center, we're not giving them a place just to live, all through the week and all 24 hours a day. We're keeping people from freezing to death at night
Yep,
is
right.
really the hope, and giving them a meal. But there are times when you're enabling them to continue in a bad lifestyle that they've chosen and continuing to do things that
Yeah.
aren't profitable. But there are also times when you're actually seeing somebody's life get transformed.
Yes.
And how do you it's just part of the deal, I guess. You
Yeah.
have to accept that both are going to happen.
Yeah.
I think that's where I've come to in my life, and I think maybe you guys have too, where you can have these options. You can identify these opportunities for outreach and for ministry, but then when you start weighing like the issues or what might be bad, I think the church is good at doing that, and then finding a reason not to walk in that ministry.
Sure.
And I think I finally got to the point with something like this with my own brain, something God did with me, where it's like it would always be easier to not do it. And the truth is, I can always find a reason, even a valid,
Yeah.
a good sounding reason to not do something. But I'm kind of sick of not doing things. I think God appreciates it when we walk in the things that He's commanded us to walk in, and leave the results, leave the parsing of whether you're enabling or whether leave the results up to Him. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
You can literally reason out how you're enabling
Yes.
bad behavior with everything we do
Yes.
whether it's free food market or what we're teaching on Sunday. I mean, there's always a way that you can figure that out.
Yes.
So if you're going to err on one side or the other, err on the side of grace and love
There you go.
and compassion for people, because that's clearly the way Jesus was. And
Yep.
so yeah, to me, it's a no-brainer at this
It is
point.
a no-brainer. So there might be people listening that have no idea what we do. It may sound a little funny because we talk about it being kind of like a shelter, but it's not a shelter. Like we're not giving people like their own rooms that they live in. Like what is it? If one of you could explain what we're doing down there, what does it look like?
Yeah, basically, during the winter months, we open up our building to let people come in and sleep. When it's cold outside, people they don't
Pine gets cold.
they don't necessarily have to be homeless. I mean, we're not checking IDs at the door to make sure that they're legit homeless. But like we have a couple of RV parks close by where sometimes people will come in the middle of the night because their RV just isn't keeping up with extreme cold temperatures, and so we let people sleep and we feed them a meal. Pretty simple in that regard. But as has been said, like it's a rough crowd and messy work, and oftentimes difficult people to deal with.
For sure.
But yeah, that's kind of the short. And then we give out coats and socks and blankets and things like that as part of it as well.
So as a result of that, what have we chose to do with the facility, with our church building down there? It's not really like a traditional church building anymore, is it?
No, it's primarily a warming center.
It really does reflect that ministry,
Yeah.
pretty much. And we felt that to do it well, that was necessary. And then
Yeah.
how we got the building's a whole nother story of how God has put His stamp on this thing. When do you want to explain that real quick?
Yeah, that was came about through the building became for sale. We were leasing it, and the people wanted to sell it. We didn't have the money to buy it, and so we talked to Neighbor Impact, and they found money in a grant that as long as we use it for a warming center from December to March 15th every year for 5 years. I think they lease it to us for $1 a year, and then at the end of that 5-year period, we get the building, and we get to continue to use it for a warming center. So we're doing exactly what the Lord's called us to do, and we're going to continue to do it, and we get rewarded with the building at the end of it, which is pretty cool. And I think the only stipulation is that when we're open, not just somebody in the building doing some work or cleaning, but when we're open,
Any Bible study, any church service,
anything, we have to allow the homeless people.
It's their building.
They get to come in, and again, that's
Which we would do that anyway.
we would do that here. So
It's a win-win.
yeah.
So the pre-story is that we were leasing that building, and the owners had decided they were going to sell the building. They offered it to us. It was way out above our pay grade. We weren't going to, so we just thought at that point, well, God's moving us on to something else, and we're going to start looking somewhere else. And then it just so happened that the people that bought it were the people that are very encouraged and supportive of the warming center and made us this deal.
Yeah.
So we just saw it wasn't anything we pushed into or tried to make happen. It's just God just determined that this is something that this congregation, and it was just validation again that we're doing what we should be doing.
I think the other cool part of the story too is that the owner, they were pretty proud of the building and pretty high price, and they took a 20% reduction in their sales price as a donation, basically a write-off, in order to make the deal happen. So just kind of this perfect storm of things that came together at the right time. In order for it to happen.
No, it's a super cool thing. So what might be some of the challenges to the church, specifically with that outreach down there? Like how does it affect what goes on inside the church?
There's some weird stuff and weird people.
So our already weird Sundays, I guess early days.
We could have a whole podcast just about the weird stories.
Well, actually, one day we should. That should be like our anniversary episode every year.
Yeah.
Is like recalling the weird stories from that year.
I like that.
There's so many that we've compiled over the years, the 11 years here, and then you've got some with your 6 years or whatever with the warming shelter and what happened down there. But there's no doubt that part of the challenge with taking on a ministry like this is that it's kind of changed the dynamics even within the congregation. So you are going to have some bleed from the outreach to the inside of the church. So what's some of what we've seen? Or
I think there's a fair amount of people, and this is probably true in any church anywhere. So I'm not. This is going to sound like I'm knocking people, and I'm not. But there's a fair amount of people that would be supportive of the idea of something like a warming center, and even give money to it and help it have resources.
Just don't let me see it.
Right, exactly. That's where I was going. And the second that we had a cool thing this winter happen where our warming shelter guests would come to church services, and I don't think it was always because they wanted to be there. It's just because it wasn't outside.
Yeah, it was warm inside. Yeah,
but they were there, and these are people that don't understand church etiquette by and large, if there is such a thing. They don't know kind of what's expected of them, and we don't put those expectations on people, but they just don't know how to act in that kind of a scenario. And so for the church crowd, that was really difficult, and I think kind of rubbed up against some people
for sure
who had a real struggle with kind of their space being invaded in that way.
Yeah, their comfort being challenged.
And I would even say we've kind of accepted the idea that maybe for 9 months out of the year we're going to grow and have some regular normal people show up, but come December every year we're going to run into the same thing where people are going to weigh the comfort and the safety and all those things, and may choose just to move on down the road. And we've already seen that happen. It's uncomfortable. I mean, I was there one Sunday where it was way out of my comfort zone.
And you were preaching, right?
Yeah. It was gnarly. And so it is hard.
The dude had the butterfly knife.
Yeah.
Just flipping a butterfly knife around like it was a fidget
burping,
spinner,
slamming doors. I mean, it was odd.
We've had outbursts, almost kind of demonic sounding outbursts at times. And it gets crazy. So we'll actually grow during the summer with church people, and then we'll be faithful to lose them all and undo that growth when we open the
and again, you won't. What I was starting to say is that you won't probably attract families,
younger kids,
people with younger kids, because again, it's just
so safety is another actual physical safety is is another possible negative effect
Sure.
that it could have. Is there is really no peace of mind when a lot of these people are around. A lot of it isn't just, that they're drug users or alcoholics or whatever. A lot of it we have seen firsthand now. It's mental illness, and you can't predict what someone's going to do when their brain is broken.
I mean, there are.
Right.
I
Yeah.
don't think safety's it's the comfort probably, but a perceived safety, because there are people there that if something started to go down, we have the sheriff's office is close by. We have
For
people
sure.
there that
Yeah.
would step in and help. There's probably, it would probably get handled pretty quickly.
Sure.
But it's that idea of comfort, which
Yeah.
whether we like to admit it or not, we put that pretty high up on our
Sure.
priority list.
Well, and even building relationships with people that are not like us, like that's a hard thing for anybody anywhere.
There
Yeah.
you go.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's just part of the struggle is, okay, like, it's our thought that God is bringing these people to us.
It takes true investment. It takes work.
does.
Yeah.
And it's
You gotta work at it.
hard work to build relationships with, people that are in this circumstance oftentimes.
Well, and I think even beyond that, I think when we talk about cultural engagement, that goes to every realm of the people around us.
Yeah.
There's that idea that the non-Christians are gonna. I don't know what we're afraid of sometimes.
Right.
But this idea that they're just these evil people that are going to bring evil into our lives, and we got to stay
Yeah.
away from it at all costs.
Right.
I remember even when our kids were little, that we kind of put that out there a little bit, like they're these guys are all just. I don't know what we were doing exactly, but it was a mistake.
Oh, I know what
Yeah.
you were doing. Well, that's the risk of Christianity, right? This is why we become separatists, is
Yeah.
because we don't want to be infected by what
Yeah.
they have, know.
Right.
But at the same time, we can't, on any level, fulfill our mission and purpose in Christ if we do that. So I remember when the kids were young and started going to Sunday school or even youth group, you'd see you'd identify the dangerous kids coming in, right? Like, these kids shouldn't be in here. They're going to infect and they would bring some of their stuff in, and some of their stuff would rub off. And it's like, well, it'd be easier just to put a high fence around
Yeah.
this ministry and only allow people that we think are safe.
But the misnomer of that is that but such were some of you, and kind of still are. So we're infected as well.
Yes.
Now we're redeemed, and God is transforming us. But the truth is that we're not that much different.
Nope.
Right.
Apart from Christ, we're not different at all. So
Yeah.
So purposeful Christianity is risky, like, no matter what,
Yeah,
whether we're talking
absolutely.
spiritually, whether we're talking, comfort wise or lifestyle wise, or even physically. We even told that people the other night. We had our first meeting of the year with the volunteers and the staff, had some pizza, talked a little bit about the upcoming year, and just told, made sure the new people knew, if you're at all thinking that you don't want to be in danger, or you don't want to be in a risky ministry, like, this ain't the one for you. Like,
Yeah.
something may happen, something bad might go wrong. Like, you might get hurt, you might, like, someone else might get hurt. Like, it's not for the faint of heart, and we just kind of have to let people know that, right?
Yeah. I think
Right
of a
from the get-go.
couple of guys last year that, one guy started off the season just, these might not be his words, but kind of this vibe of like I hate the homeless. They're a bunch of lazy bums and just need to get a job, kind of an attitude. And then and he's a guy that intentionally engaged,
Yep.
through the season, kind of against his better judgment,
Yep.
really. And by the end of the season, he's like, I love these people.
Yep.
Like, I've got to know them and realize, like, these are real people with real stories and real difficulties in their life that got them where they are, and just had a total shift in his perspective, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, God has done a work in him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And another guy who, had a rough night one night with an incident with someone that involved mental illness, and came away from that saying, like, this was top 5 worst nights of my life. I'm never coming back.
And then couldn't stay away.
A couple of days later, he came back.
That's right.
Right. And raring to go this year. And
Yeah.
that's cool when we take the time to, kind of go against the grain of our flesh, right, and engage in ways that God calls us to engage. God meets us in that.
Well, and not some weird superficial way, but it makes you feel alive too.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
there's a lot of ministries that are safe. We'll usually settle for those, but when this is in the trenches, gospel work. Like, it doesn't get any, more down and dirty than this. And there's something that it brings something alive in the Christian, I think, when they
Yeah.
experience it. Even if it's not a great experience, there's something that's like, okay, this is different, and it's mostly what God's doing in us and showing us as we engage on that level. So,
I mean, it resembles what Jesus did much more than
Yes.
most of what the church does.
Yes.
If you just look at what is going on there, it looks a lot like what you read in the Gospels.
Yeah.
And when you just show love to somebody that is the most, unlovable in our society, the impact that has on them. I mean, it really does.
Yeah.
It matters.
It matters a lot. And it's cool to see when we do see the wins and the transformations, because we don't always see that, Sunday ministries and things like that in the church.
Right.
You don't always get to see something that clear take place.
Right.
And so it's rewarding as well.
For sure.
Yeah.
So Warming Center is not without its challenges inside the church. What about this other outreach that we have that's coming up here, the trunk or treat one, the Halloween? Does it have any? Does it bring any negativity or create any negativity or challenge within the church?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything, and I think we kind of.
Yeah, I'm going to say no to.
We agreed. We did agree when we started this that,
Yes.
that if at any point this became something that we were, felt like the Lord wouldn't have us do, or that we were compromising or whatever, we would shut it down in an instant.
Yep.
Because we were trying something that we'd never tried before, and we've been very open and sensitive to what, is God in this or not. So we're trying to look at the fruit that comes from it, and so far we have not seen anything
Right.
negative.
We haven't gotten
from,
any Klingons or anything in the building.
No,
Yeah.
no. I haven't
No upside down crosses.
No.
Okay.
And I think it's always good in these things and all the things that we've talked about that, like part of our role as pastors, I think, is to kind of push people out of their comfort zones with some of these kinds of things and lead people in directions that they don't always want to go, for their good and God's glory, as we talked about earlier. And, reaching out to your community is a difficult thing at times, and leaning into things can be difficult. And so, we have the privilege of leading people in those directions and, just pushing them to things that they might not do on their own.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So let's go to, this has been sprinkled in there already by both you guys throughout the whole thing, some of the positives. What are some of the positive ways that Let's Go Warming Shelter impacts what we see going on inside the church down there? And you already just mentioned one with Mike.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
mentioned his name.
Yeah. It shows the community that we care. We've talked about that, like it helps, not that our main goal is to build a positive reputation in the community, but it does help us in that regard to be known in the community, for something that is Christ-like. Again, it helps push people out of their comfort zones in ways that they need to be pushed out of their comfort zones. We've seen, even in the messiness of, our Warming Center guests, that we've seen God move in their lives. I just shared a story the other night about a guy who, when he first came to us, was hostile to God. And not long ago stood up in a church service and asked for prayer, for a medical procedure. Like, that's a bit of
Was
a
that
win.
before or after he trimmed his beard?
that was after he trimmed his beard in the middle of church. But that's a win. Like, the guy's not as hostile to God as he used to be. I don't know if he's come to faith, and I don't know if he will, kind of under our watch, so
But
to
something
speak.
different's going on.
But
with
something
this guy.
has happened there, right? Like, that's a win.
Well, that's the part that you don't. I think people have a perception of what Christians are, what churches are today, and a lot of it's negative, and a lot of it's deserved, if we're being honest.
sure.
And so when we can do something that is no strings attached, better to give than receive, just loving people, it's pretty cool. And for the church to be able, that's the other, to me, the big positive is when the church comes together with a common purpose.
Yes.
Right.
It has a mission, a tangible, hands-on mission that
Yep.
is really, I don't know, pretty obvious with the impact that it's having.
Sure.
It's really cool, and both of these do that.
So there's a rallying going on, definitely, that we've seen down in Lapine, and I think maybe that's the biggest plus that I've witnessed as a result of having that ministry inside of the church. Like, the biggest positive or additive is we have lost people. That church was bigger before we were kind of doing all this, and I think as people started coming in from that outreach to the church, we saw a lot of people leave that just can't handle it. A lot of people visit and don't come back, because of the flavor of it. But I think what we do have there, what it has been whittled down to, like what's going on in the lives of the people that have stayed and remained, has been the coolest part. There's been a tightening up, a refining, kind of like a serious Christianity that's emerging within the core of the church that exists down there. And I think that's been the neatest thing, is there's a different caliber of community and tightness as a result of this outpouring that's going on as a congregation. So
Kind of a group of people that have now linked together and have leaned into a cause.
Yeah.
And God has done something in their lives.
Yeah. Exactly.
and at the same time has done something in the lives of the people that we're trying to help as well.
Yeah.
It's kind of a neat
Funny
thing.
how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's go trunk or treat up here. Positives. What are the things that it adds or benefit? What ways does it benefit the church? And we've talked about some of it, but
Yeah.
because we wouldn't be doing it if it doesn't. So
Oh, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say it's kind of similar to what we said about down there. Coming together to do something for the community. Where we band together and kind of get into the trenches together is always good. And then just the obvious impact that it has.
Yeah.
I often stand because I don't like to dress up. I just put an orange vest on and stand at the front there
Home
and,
honor.
and welcome people. And
we're gonna get you a
talk to 'em.
Segway one of these years, too.
But over and over and over again,
I'll
the
pitch in
people.
on that effort.
Yeah, I have Segway. I probably die.
Can you wear Crocs on a Segway?
Ooh.
Whoa,
together?
whoa. No. So anyway, but the comments that are made,
Yep.
one after the other about, I can't believe this is free. I
Yes.
can't believe you guys are just doing this with, it blows people away.
Yeah.
And again, the statement that it makes when Christians are generous is, it shouldn't be that surprising
Yeah.
and it shouldn't make that much of an impact, but it does.
Yeah.
So it's a way that the community is informed on what kind of people we are, what kind of church that we are.
Yeah.
Because like you said earlier, like the reputation that churches have is that we're snotty, we're snooty, we don't do anything that anyone else does. We don't do anything to help people. We're all about ourselves, which we've earned that. We've earned all that. They get to see all of that challenged and kind of reversed by something so simple and,
Yeah.
Well,
and
and we
stupid.
let them come into the building, use
Yes.
everything that's here. I mean,
Yes.
it's trash by the end of that time.
Yes.
But again,
Free food. We buy
Yeah.
all the food and just feed everybody for free. There's 400 people that come through. We just feed them all.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So it's just an act of just pure generosity that the best part leads to interaction with people in our community, conversation, relationship, leads to some of them knowing exactly where they're going to go on the day that they need it, or some of them have even trickled in as a result.
Well, and that's part of the reason that we do all these
That's
other
not-
things
that's
with the
it.
building. We have the community, the theater group that comes in, the Parks and Rec group that comes in.
Yeah.
All of these families hopefully are just realizing, wow, this is a church that is just
They care.
They care, and
Yep.
they're part of this community, and they're generous. And
Yep.
and again, the goal isn't just that they pat us on the back and say what a great church.
Yes.
It's so that people will come to meet Jesus,
Right.
in a salvific way,
Exactly.
a germane and salvific way.
Germain to salvation. Is that?
Just kidding.
Tito.
And another benefit too is like it's we're helping people in our church think beyond the four walls and outside of
Yes.
themselves, and just by helping foster these events, like it's a way that we can lead people in a direction. Like we can stand up on a Sunday morning or talk on a podcast about being reaching out and reaching the least of these kinds of things, but if we don't ever provide any opportunities for those things to happen, it's all lip service. And
Agreed.
so not only are we sitting here advocating for that, but we're providing these opportunities to put it into practice so
Totally.
people can see what it looks like. People in our church can see what it looks like to reach out
Yeah.
beyond our walls.
It's one thing to proclaim our Bibles from the pulpit every week. It's another thing to actually demonstrate that which we're proclaiming. And
Right.
and I know that we all endeavor to, we try to do that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
Like it's meaningful. We heard about it. Now let's go do it is kind of what it is.
Right.
So final parting words to anyone listening that might be considering what kind of, ministries they should get into, as a pastor or whatever. Word to the inward church. Let's put it that way. What would that be? What would you say?
What did you just say?
A word to the inward
He said
church.
inward, not
Inward.
word.
I didn't say word to your mother.
It sounded like word.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Not outward, inward. But when you said inward, I'm like, what?
So I am
Like,
saying
wait a minute.
I am saying a word to the inward church
Yeah.
that has a problem
I'm glad we clarified
with
that.
doing these
Yeah.
things.
I'm just there. Okay.
So my wife is right. She's like, you mumble, dude. The older you get, you just stink and mumble.
Yeah.
Like I can't
No,
understand
that it
it.
totally should have made sense based on what we were talking about, but I couldn't.
No, I
get
heard
past
the
that.
same thing
I'm
you
like,
heard.
I don't even know how to answer right now.
What was that, Napoleon Dynamite?
I was
Son,
ready to jump.
I can't understand a word you just said.
I was ready to jump out of the elevator. It's like, oh, we're going there. I'm out.
Translator.
I saw something. Joe Thorne had written something about cultural engagement, and he said that he has a threefold approach to engaging culture: reject what is evil, receive what is good, and redeem what is broken or lost.
I like
And
that.
I thought that was a really helpful way to think about it, because we tend to just push everything off as this is all evil. Well, wait a second. There might be some good in here that's something we can receive, and maybe even something we can redeem.
Yep. Right.
And I think if we kind of think about, if something is outright evil and we know there's nothing, we as Christians need to stay clear of that. We need to be, just lock it down, be done with it.
Right.
But there's a lot of good that's still out there in the world that we can receive and that we can relate to people. When we're trying to influence and interact with people, there are some things that we can find common ground on.
Yeah.
And then again, the goal is always to try to restore it, redeem it
Yeah.
to something that is, take what's broken and make it,
Yeah.
make it better.
That's
So,
very Christian.
That's a good final word. I don't have anything to add to that.
yeah. I
You're
thought
not
it
going to
was
add to that, Chad?
No,
You're just going to let them have it just like that?
that was good.
Dang.
Thank you, Joe Thorne and Brent.
Yeah, mostly him. Yeah.
I would say
It's like that thing from The Office where Michael Scott quotes Wayne Gretzky, like you miss 100% shots you don't take. Wayne Gretzky, Michael Scott.
Yeah.
This was Joe Thorne, Brent Maxwell.
Yeah, you're welcome. It was nothing really.
All right, why don't you pray us out? Chad, pray us out.
All right. God, thanks for today and our conversation. Just pray that it would be helpful to people, helpful to the church, helpful to Christians, and just pray that not only our church, but churches everywhere would see what it means to be outward-faced, outward-focused, that you would help us, even just to redeem the broken relationship of the church that it has earned over time of being inward. That you would help us in our endeavor to look like Christ and to do the things that Christ would do, all in an effort to shine the light of the gospel where it needs to be. We ask it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks for joining us.